Diablo is one of those games that is simultaneously one of the first and one of the best in its genre, with its simple but addicting gameplay, clever level design, and excellent horror atmosphere. Taking place in the fantasy town of Tristram, Diablo sends you diving into a multi-level dungeon, infested with dangerous animals, demons, and the undead. Using the town as your home base, you choose one of three character classes and get to work against the forces of hell. The warrior is your typical melee fighter. You can tank a lot of damage and deal a lot of damage as long as you're in melee range of your enemies. The standard setup would be a sword and shield, though you can use axes and maces as well. Maces are actually more effective against the undead enemies like skeletons, while swords are more effective against animals. Though these distinctions aren't very important, I never found myself keeping a backup mace for undead enemies or anything. Usually the weapon with the highest damage will do the trick just fine. You can also forego using a shield if you opt to wield a two-handed weapon. Though I prefer not to, since having a shield is extremely useful for survival, especially since you can get swarmed by enemies from all directions very easily, and the enemies in the late game deal a ton of damage. The warrior possesses the repair skill, which allows you to restore an item's durability, but it comes at a cost of the item's maximum durability, so it should only be used in emergencies when you can't easily get back to town to repair your gear. The rogue is the best range damage dealer of the three. You can rapid fire from a distance for basically the entire game since bows have unlimited arrows, though they do lose their durability fairly fast, so I guess in gameplay it acts much the same as ammunition. The biggest advantage that the rogue has over the warrior is that you don't need to get close to enemies to deal damage, and you can even kite them around the levels very easily if you need to. A rogue can use melee weapons, but I don't really see a point in that since I would rather just play the warrior if I wanted to use melee weapons. And you can be pretty successful making some sort of hybrid if you know what you're doing. The rogue's special ability is to detect and disarm traps on doors and chests. Last but not least is the sorcerer, which is undoubtedly the most complex class of the three. While the warrior and rogue can more or less just spam click everything to death, with the sorcerer you have to do a bit more management with all your various spells, equipment, and tanking and kiting like the warrior or rogue. You get normal damage dealing spells like fireballs, but also more advanced ones like firewall, which you can use to trap and barbecue your enemies. A lot of the enemies in the game have certain magic type resistances and immunities, so you sometimes have to juggle between using spells of different types, like fire, lightning, and holy. There are also a good amount of support spells like teleportation, telekinesis, healing, and mana shield, which makes enemies damage your mana pool rather than your health. All in all, the sorcerer is really fun and slightly more challenging than the other two because of all the abilities you have to juggle around. But all of those abilities make you really powerful the more you play. The sorcerer's class ability is to recharge staff spells, but at a cost of its maximum charge, similar to the warrior's repair ability. While the sorcerer is by far the best with magic, the warrior and rogue can both utilize magic in some effective ways. While you'll never be as powerful as the sorcerer with magic, certain spells can be very useful like healing, mana shield, and town portal, which just makes a two-way portal back to town. You can also cast spells without using your mana pool by using scrolls, and of course you can heal your health and mana pools by drinking red and blue potions in the typical video game fashion. So basically you play the game by clicking to move around and attack enemies. Just regularly clicking on an enemy acts as a move attack, where your character will automatically try and get in range before attacking. However, you can hold a key down to attack without moving if you wish. Right click is used to cast spells though, so you actually end up using that more if you're playing the sorcerer. You also have a hotbar where you can assign different potions and scrolls to number keys to use them quickly. And yeah, that's more or less how you'll play through the entire game. Move around, attack enemies, pick up loot, repeat. Sort of like Fallout 1, you can ignore the keyboard binds and play the game exclusively with a mouse if you want, which is kinda neat. You know, if I ever lose a hand or something one day, I know I can still perfectly play Diablo and Fallout. Admittedly, the gameplay is rather simple, but I don't think it needs to be any more complicated. In fact, I think its simplicity is what makes it so addicting. Being able to just click to do most actions in the game doesn't make the game too easy, because navigating the levels, the tactics you use to engage enemies, and inventory management is all up to you, and the game certainly doesn't hold your hand. Enemies are relentless and can almost effortlessly surround and overwhelm you if you make mistakes. And many times enemies will move very fast and come out of the shadows, making you have to think quickly about how you're going to engage them. Movement is an integral part of the gameplay, especially for the warrior who needs to move in range of enemies in order to do damage. But it's also essential for the rogue and sorcerer even though they deal range damage, because enemies themselves can also deal range damage and close in on you very fast. With all three classes, you're going to have to create choke points in the levels, kite enemies around, and just generally be one step ahead of them, or else you'll be killed pretty easily. The levels do have traps like barrels rigged with explosives and doors that shoot arrows at you when opened, but the thing that got me a bunch was just entering a room and finding like a billion enemies inside ready to pounce on you. Even though the game is an isometric view and you can see the level layout as you move through it, there is a line of sight mechanic. So you see rooms but you can't exactly see what's in them. You never know what's around the next corner, which creates a lot of tension. You have to traverse the levels and face the enemies in your own way, and usually you don't have much time to thoroughly scope out an area. So being quick and thinking fast is a trick to success. All of this makes you feel very vulnerable. You can't just go prancing around like an unstoppable protagonist with impenetrable layers of plot armor. Your character is just one human in a gigantic sea of monsters. Monsters which are definitely not pushovers. You'll have to be both skilled as a player and strong as a character to survive. The game's world consists of the town of Tristram and the various dungeons that lie beneath it. The town itself acts as your main hub for healing up, buying and selling items, and talking to the various characters about your quests. As you level up and proceed through the dungeon, more and more quests will open up, as well as higher tier items will be available for purchase at the local vendors, like the blacksmith Griswold and the town witch Adria. Many of the items you pick up will be enchanted with different properties, and you'll have to identify them in the classic Dungeons & Dragons sense. You can do so with an identify scroll or spell, or by paying Cain the Elder in town to identify them for you. These characters, along with some other NPCs in the town, can also give you hints and lore about the game in addition to quests to complete inside the dungeons. There's even a local drunk that is pretty funny to listen to.
Oh, I don't care what Griswold says. They can't make anything like they used to in the old days.
The town doesn't feature a storage box for the player's items though, so you kinda end up just piling all your stuff on the ground so your inventory isn't always full. At one point, you're probably gonna end up having tens of thousands of gold laying on the ground just where the town portal spawns. But anyway, when you're done hanging out in the town, you have to go down and explore the dungeons. There are 4 different dungeons in the overall labyrinth, each containing 4 levels that you have to descend through. Here's where the really interesting part of this game comes in. Each level won't be exactly the same every time you play through it. When you start a new game, it actually randomizes all the dungeons' layouts, enemy encounters, loot, and quests. Random isn't actually the correct term here because it's not like you're ever going to find a meadow full of unicorns down there. It's more of a generated selection based on a predetermined pool of variables. So for example, one level could either contain quest X, Y, or Z, enemy X, Y, or Z, and loot X, Y, or Z. An early example of this would be for the quests for the boss fight called the Butcher. If you see a body outside the entrance to the cathedral, then you'll know for sure you got the Butcher quest. And if not, then you didn't get it on this run and will instead have another quest in its place. I'm not sure exactly how the game randomizes the level layouts, but I imagine it's also mixing and matching different pre-built combinations just like the other aspects of the game. The labyrinth's 4 dungeons are as follows: the cathedral, the catacombs, the caves, and finally hell itself. First is the cathedral, which is accessed directly from the town itself. This is the first dungeon and is generally the easiest. Unless you got the Butcher and the Skeleton King quest, then you might have to start praying, because those 2 bosses will eat any new Diablo player alive.
Fresh meat.
The cathedral consists of a lot of stone architecture with coffins, statues, and other things resembling death serving as decoration, usually filled to the brim with skeletons, goblins, and zombies that come out of every corner to repeatedly shank you to death. The level structure usually consists of large rooms connected by similarly large hallways. Some of these rooms are sort of library areas that have a lot of scrolls and spell books you can learn from. The loot on this level will generally be of the lowest quality, but there are sometimes a lot of these altars that do random neat little things when you activate them, like upgrading all of your red and blue potions to yellow, which makes them regenerate both your health and mana at the same time. Next is the catacombs, which first sounds like you'll encounter a whole lot more skeletons, but actually the enemies here can be pretty varied, featuring creatures like goatmen, gargoyles, invisible demons, and more. The catacombs have a lot more narrow corridors and halls in comparison to the cathedral, creating a lot of opportunities to set up choke points or have the tables turned on yourself and get trapped by hordes of enemies. At this point in the game though, your character is getting better geared than what was previously available in the cathedral, so while the enemies are getting tougher, so are you. After the catacombs, you descend down into the caves, which are much different than the previous 2 dungeons, featuring wide open chasms filled with lava pools, and fenced structures dividing areas. Both the lava pools and the wood fences restrict your movement, but they obviously don't restrict your visibility or range damage capability, allowing you to fire safely at enemies who are stuck on the opposite side of a lava pool, for example. Of course, there are enemies capable of ranged attacks as well, so it's pretty balanced. In this part of the game, you're really going to have to get your skills with movement down, because you'll be fighting goat archers, acid spitting animals, magma chucking demons, and other varieties of winged and horned creatures. At this point, the enemies get a lot more hellish in nature, and you'll be seeing less and less things like skeletons and zombies. And finally, after the caves, you enter Hell itself, which has open areas like the caves, though they are a lot less natural, and have very long corridors connecting them. Hell has a lot more distinct rooms as well, like the cathedral and the catacombs, as opposed to the caves. And of course, from a place named after Hell, it features the strongest enemy types and boss fights in the game, from giant winged demons to Hell Knights, succubi, deadly serpents, and magic spamming wizards. This part of the game can be especially challenging depending on which combination of enemy types the game decides to throw at you. The mages in particular are really tough because they can cast spells very quickly and can teleport around the map, making them hard to hit. And the demonic Hell Knights chase after you with unparalleled determination in order to skewer you to death. The final boss, El Diablo himself, resides here in the last level of Hell as well. Descending down into his lair is such an awesome experience, and by this point in the game you better hope you're leveled up and skilled enough to take him on, or you'll get obliterated pretty handedly. Diablo involves a lot of inventory management and leveling up your character. You start the game off with basically nothing except the default weapon and some gold. The cathedral will be the best way to get some decent gear early on. As I mentioned before, the loot you obtain will be randomized every time you start a new game, so you just have to go explore and complete the quest to see what you can find. Something to note is that your character doesn't change in appearance when you equip new gear unless it's an armor piece of the next tier. So you start with, say, tier 1, which is the default look of your character. Then when you upgrade to the second tier of armor, your appearance changes. And when you upgrade to the third tier of armor, your appearance changes for the third time. There's no guarantee when you will get certain pieces of equipment though. On one run I got the second tier of armor towards the beginning of the catacombs, and on another run I got it towards the beginning of the caves. Same goes for all the items in the game. So you have to make do with the cards you're dealt with, and adapt to what different playthroughs throw at you. Likewise with the enemies. You might get a variant of dudes immune to fire damage, making your fire spells completely useless. It's not all bad though, because it's not like you can end up with absolutely trash gear for the entire game. Certain quests always reward you with the same powerful items, and you will always get some quests in your game rather than none. Same with the items you find in levels. You'll always find items of a higher tier the deeper you go. Again, it's not completely random in the true definition of the word. And that's what I really appreciate about Diablo. It's got the randomized elements to make repeat playthroughs more varied, but you'll always be getting quality handcrafted content. There's definitely a method to the madness. There's more to character building than just equipment though. As you level up, you'll be able to invest points in your character's attributes to make them deal more damage, have more health or mana, have better defenses, etc. This is where a little variation in builds come into play. While Diablo 1 definitely doesn't have anywhere near the amount of build variety as other action RPGs, you still have some aspects to customize. For example, leveling up your magic as the warrior so you can cast healing spells, or leveling up your strength with the rogue and sorcerer so you can wear higher tiers of armor. As I alluded to before though, equipment you find throughout the game may have different sets of magical modifiers, some of which can boost your character's attributes. As an example, if you're playing the sorcerer and find an item that increases your strength, then you can use it to wear higher level armor and focus your level up points on magic instead. All of these variables lead to each playthrough being quite different and somewhat memorable than the last. Even two playthroughs of the same class won't exactly feel the same because of all the variation. Diablo is an extremely immersive game due to the overall audio-visual experience it provides. It's got an excellent horror atmosphere with the dark and bleak visuals of the various dungeons. Exploring and battling through the nightmarish levels is a great experience from start to finish. And this is partly because of the superb music tracks that play during each dungeon. They are perfectly suspenseful and creepy in a way that complements the gameplay and setting very well. It can be really unnerving at times exploring the dungeons because of the music, in combination with the hellish sounds coming from the various enemies. The game is absolutely dripping with charm and personality from every corner, from the grotesque looking monsters to the unforgettable one-liners the characters occasionally make.
The sanctity of this place has been fouled. Your reign of pain has ended.
Your death will be avenged.
The game's personality is especially showcased in the town of Tristram, which features one of the most iconic and memorable pieces of music in gaming history. A masterfully constructed guitar piece that is full of wonder and mystery, but also makes you feel safe and at home at the same time. It's not just the music though that makes Diablo shine. The characters in this game are really brought to life by some outstanding voice acting performances.
Hello, my friend. Stay a while and listen.
What ails you, my friend?
I sense a soul in search of answers.
While the story in Diablo isn't trying to be a masterfully written epic fantasy tale, it certainly doesn't shy away from making every character or story interaction a memorable experience.
Please, no hurt, no kill. Keep alive, and next time good bring to you.
My blade sings for your blood, mortal. And by my dark masters it shall not be denied.
Each character speaks in such a distinct and memorable way that is really captivating when you listen to them talk about the game's world. And the game's world itself is really fascinating with all the mystical and occult fantasy elements thrown together with traditional religious symbolism like heaven and hell. As for the actual narrative context of the game itself, being a lone hero who descends into hell to defeat the devil is a rather simple idea, but it makes a perfect setting for a fantasy game that is essentially a massive dungeon crawl. I think even the simplest of ideas can turn out wonderfully as long as you have the right ingredients. And Diablo certainly fits that description. So in conclusion, Diablo is one hell of a game. It's got super addicting gameplay, great replay value due to the randomized elements, some of the best music and audio design from gaming, especially from its time. It stands firmly as one of the best horror-themed fantasy games I've ever played. You always feel the nail-biting tension behind every corner, as well as the wonder behind the mysterious elements that surround the game's world. Starting up a new run will always guarantee a good time, making the game extremely replayable. It's one of those games that is simple and effective in its execution, which makes it easy to pick up and challenging to master. Alright, so that's all I got to say about Diablo in this video. Thanks for watching, and until next time, peace.